Now, what are the determining conditions for how things ought to be in a naturalistic or atheistic world? A world without God. A world without a transcendent personal being of moral character with a design plan for the universe. I think the theist can give an account of this. On his view, there's no special design that the universe conforms to or departs from. Things just are the way they are. How can things be any more than just the way they are? How can they be departures from how they ought to be? Now it looks like the theist is in a position to present a problem of evil for atheism. Now, I have talked to two friends of mine who are sophisticated atheist philosophers. William Rowe is one and Paul Draper is another. And I've asked them, what would you say evil is? And what account of the nature of evil would you give that you would say is compatible with your naturalism, with your atheism? Professor Rowe said, well, how about this? And I thought this was very interesting because he didn't want to say, well, I think it's this. He said, what about this? So it's very experimental and tentative and provisional. He didn't just, grab the branch and cling to it. He wanted to give himself some scope for coming up with some other ideas. He said, how about this? Evil is an intrinsically bad state of affairs. Well, I think what you've done is you've traded the word evil in for the word bad, and then the question is, okay, now what makes a state of affairs bad? Intrinsic or not, what makes it bad is that it's a departure from the way things ought to be. Now, what makes one state of affairs different than another state of affairs is that it's somehow, in some sense, a departure from the way this is. But that wouldn't make it bad, right? Being different wouldn't be bad. Or being unwelcome by me wouldn't necessarily make it bad, right? What makes it bad is that it shouldn't be that way. It should not be that way. So how should it be? And what determines that? Not human predilection, surely. That wouldn't make it especially evil in any profound, deep, objective sense. What did Paul Draper say? Now, in this case, I asked Paul Draper this in a public meeting. I was presenting a paper, and he had already presented a paper. And I said, now it'd be interesting to see what Paul has to say about this particular claim I'm making. And so he waited until almost the end of the discussion. And he said, how about this? And it was so interesting to see him preface his remarks in the same way, with this kind of provisional, tentative commitment. And it sounded to me like he wanted to say that evil might be a social artifact. It's a matter of our perceptual experience of the world. And that evil is like money, right? A dollar bill is just a piece of paper with ink on it, as a matter of physical stuff. But it comes to have additional properties under certain social conditions that are specifiable by us. And so we agree to let that thing function a certain way in society, and it represents something for us. And that's all evil is. But now, if you say that, then you've given up the game too, because now evil is not fundamentally evil or bad. Right? It's just a social construction. And then you can have different social contexts where some think that these things are bad and others think that this is bad, and they're not wrong. And there's no genuine disagreement here because they just have different feelings about these states of affairs. Now, how could that count against the existence of God? See? So I've come to really appreciate this particular challenge for the person who's fallen back on the evidentialist argument from evil. Pray tell, What then is evil, if not a departure from the way things ought to be? And if it is that, then how do you get that without God, who would ground a design plan, who would be the one who determines the conditions of how things ought to be, such that a departure from that not only is evil, not only is an intrinsically bad state of affairs, but is a violation of the will of God, which is what sin is. So what have we done? We've characterized evil, the problem of evil, as a kind of defeater of theistic belief. But it has various versions. In the main, the versions are the logical argument from evil, which claims that it is logically inconsistent, contradictory to believe that God is all-powerful, morally perfect, and that there's evil in the world. The evidential argument claims that certain types of evils and perhaps the degree of evil that we find in the world is what makes it unlikely that God exists, even though it's still logically possible that God exists. We argued that the logical argument from evil is invalid apart from certain assumptions which probably aren't true. So this is not a very good argument, and we noted that contemporary atheologians like William Rowe and others have abandoned this argument in favor of the evidential argument, thinking that this is a stronger argument. But I've tried to offer three different strategies for replying to the evidential argument from evil, including the formulation of a theodicy in terms of either actual or possible reasons God could have for permitting the kinds and amounts of evil that we find in the world, presenting positive evidence for the existence of God, and then raising, finally, the question for the evidentialist: what is evil, if not a departure from the way things ought to be, which implies a design plan which has objective purchase in our experience only if it's backed by a transcendent personal being of moral dimensions like God.